Welcome to our second edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. We're now on the eve of the first ever conference on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations, or CDAC. We'll have a segment to dissect the international coverage on this event so far, or the deafening silence leading up to it, which will be analyzed in a roundtable discussion with journalist colleagues from the US, Pakistan, and China. Why are they ignoring it? For the first time ever, if you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Weibo, you can send me or send our guests a comment or a question, and we'll talk about it in the discussion. If you're watching this on the CGTN application, you won't be able to do that. So please go to one of these four social media platforms if you want to have your say. Remember to look for the keyword of CGTN, then you'll find us. So what about Asian civilizations that interest you? Do you think it is important to learn from other civilizations? Can we avoid heading for a clash of civilizations between the East and the West? Before we get to that media critique part, let me remind you of the importance of Asia historically and today. Now, the current population of Asia is 4.6 billion, nearly 60% of the total world's population, with a GDP growth forecasted at 5.6% in 2019. Asia contributes to more than 60% of global growth. Now, the Asian people are extremely diverse. We speak about 2,300 different languages, and we follow many different kinds of religions, such as Buddhism, Hinduism, or Islam. Among them, Hinduism and Islam represent the largest number of followers, with over 1 billion followers each. And there are some 260 million indigenous peoples in Asia, 3/4 of the world's total, making it the most culturally diverse region in the world. Looking back in history, though, the majority of the world's oldest civilizations came from Asia, from the Indus River Valley in South Asia, the hilly flanks in southwestern Asia, and the Shang civilization in East Asia. And it is said that the ancient civilizations in southwestern Asia had a profound influence on the ancient Greek and Roman civilizations that were later considered to be the cradle of the Western civilization. So now, this conference is extremely important, as I said, which is being held by China on communication among Asian civilizations and between Asian civilizations with other civilizations. That leads me to our main sector, the media critique. If you follow the media, the foreign media, and especially its coverage of China, as I do, you'd be forgiven for sometimes wondering, can China do anything right? To be clear, I'm not calling on the media to stop with negative coverage. There is no perfect government or flawless society anywhere in the world, and part of the media's job is to hold leaders accountable for their words and deeds. And yet, recent weeks are a case study. It reveals how the international media may go beyond that with China. In my first episode of Headline Buster, I focused on the Belt and Road Initiative. I identified two ways how the international media displays animus toward China. For instance, the choice of words that are often harsher, that are often more sensational than necessary. And then secondly, they often focus almost entirely on the negative, ignoring most, if not all, positive, by spotlighting the fears and accusations of certain BRI critics. So in today's show, I want to illuminate for you and explain two other possible forms of bias or disproportionately negative coverage on China. First, how they routinely turn a largely positive event into a negative one. Then, is not what they do say, but what they don't say, as in the deafening silence surrounding the first ever conference on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations. Let me go to case one first about the negativity, how some media turn a largely positive event into a negative one. On April the 29th, we reported how China had just opened the so-called Olympic Games of Gardening Culture and Horticulture, the largest such expo in the world. Now, in the coming month, it will promote what President Xi Jinping calls ecological civilization, plus the need to protect the environment, to appreciate natural beauty, to educate youth, and etc. Now, here's how The Guardian, one of the most important newspapers from the UK, covers it. The headline says, "Flower power power, China digs for diplomacy with the world's largest gardening show. Now, the paper isn't seemingly interested in the green dimension of the event. Instead, the real story here, they want their readers to believe, is diplomacy. Then in the subheading, China's alleged motivation is, it seems, publicity. The expo is intended to give the nation a much-needed publicity boost, despite the fact that the planning for this expo started 6 years ago. The paper primarily quotes critics and skeptics and finishes with a quote from a security guard who can't afford a ticket to the expo. But what about the many visitors who really can afford and indeed find it potentially interesting and inspiring? I can't remember any. So, what's wrong with these approaches? I think every country around the world, including the UK, the United States, or any European countries, aim to win hearts and minds around the world through soft power. Yet, why would Chinese efforts be greeted with such hostility? And even if there is a PR or soft power component to China's efforts, can you still not at least mention some positive value from a green event like the Beijing Expo 2019? To me, I see this as a part of a broader pattern for many in foreign media. Even when China does or tries to do something good for a cause beyond narrow political or economic self-interest, it can't catch a break from the skeptics. Indeed, it appears that the suspicion, hostility, even fear of China is so deeply ingrained, many in the foreign media are unable to overcome such preconceived notions or entrenched opinions. The second factor that may lead to disproportionately negative coverage is not just what they do say, but what they don't say. That's what has been happening to the first conference on dialogue of Asian civilizations, or CDAC, which China is hosting starting May the 15th in Beijing. Now, the conference was proposed by Chinese President Xi Jinping first in 2014 in order to promote mutual respect, mutual learning among Asian civilizations, and also to help build an Asian community of shared future. Now, about 2,000 participants from 47 Asian countries will be converging in Beijing for a week of activities, including panel discussions, cultural carnivals, film and food festivals. Actually, the timing of this meeting is also very, very important, as 2 weeks before the meeting opens, a statement by a high-ranking Trump administration official has drawn people's attention to the relationship between different civilizations. The director of policy planning of the Trump administration, Karen Skinner, mentioned that China will be the first major country competitor to the US that's not Caucasian. When she cited Samuel Huntington's clash of civilization hypothesis as excuse for the US's race baiting with China, you would imagine a conference on dialogue of civilizations would draw at least some attention. It's a perfect timing for an ideal follow-up story. Well, a week before the conference, surfing the Google or Yahoo or any other search engine, there was zero mention in any mainstream Western media. The only conference-related reports in English were produced by Chinese media or other Asian media as of last night and 2 days before the meeting starts. So the silence, to quote a cliche, is indeed deafening and appalling. Why? There are many foreign correspondents in China. It will be impossible that they're not aware of such a big event, one of the biggest on the Chinese calendar this year. But there is this collective disinterest. When representatives from all Asian countries, the most important engine of the world's growth today, are converging and talking about something important, it is not worth lending your ears at all? Or maybe it's such a difficult and potentially boring topic that can't sell well to a spoiled readership. Or maybe it's because the Western-centric perspective on the world put Western stories on the front pages and Eastern stories close to the bottom. I do not know the answers. What do you think of it, the collective silence on this event? If you're watching this on the social media platforms, send your comments. If you're watching us on the CGTN app, then go to one of these 4 social media platforms, look for CGTN, and then you'll find the page where the live streaming is happening. If you're watching us on TV, you've already missed the opportunity, but catch us next time. So while you are leaving us your comments or your answers to this question, I do want to do, as usual, as I did in the first media critique, a little bit of self-critique as well. The Chinese side could indeed communicate more effectively with the international media and make this conference more appealing, especially if it is a first one. Now, a week before the conference started, in search for more information about the conference and the official website, I found that a link would only appear at the bottom of page 3, by which point an impatient journalist would have already given up. With a bit of effort, we found the site, which is 2019cdac.com or English20.2019cdac.com. Indeed, they're not very fancy, not easy to remember names. Now, surfing the site further, thinking as a journalist, we checked out the media center, which is english.mediacenter.2019cdac.com, and tried to download the media guide. Well, less than a week before the start of the conference, the screen read, "Coming soon." Ladies and gentlemen, I think although there could be an excuse for the Chinese to say, well, this is the first time we hold this event, it could be understandable, but I think for a country which has extensive experience in hosting such international gathering, this is not good enough. So all sides can probably do a better job. Now we're going to take a very short break. We're going to leave you with a very interesting story about Asian civilization. And when we come back, I'll have guests and colleagues from the media circle from the United States, from Pakistan, and from China to talk about all of that. Meanwhile, keep those comments and questions coming. We'll talk about them. So welcome back to the second edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. As I mentioned in the first segment of this show, there is a deafening silence on the international media part about this upcoming conference on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations, which is being hosted by China starting on 15th of May, which is Wednesday. So what are the reasons behind the collective radio silence we're witnessing? We have some media colleagues from around the world to discuss this topic, and they are Professor Dunham, former White House correspondent and also co-director of the Global Business Journalism Program of Tsinghua University. Welcome. Thank you. We have Zoon Ahmad Khan, an anchor from Guangming Daily, China, and also from Vash News, Pakistan. Welcome to the show. And last but not least, Qinduo, host from China Radio International, also under the China Media Group. So we're colleagues.
Right.
We're colleagues. Okay, so I've had a very long monologue describing the kind of phenomenon that we are seeing, that there is no international media interest in this topic. Rick, do you find it surprising? Do you find it curious that this is happening?
Well, I don't really find it surprising if you look at the way coverage generally works. In China specifically, but then in general, American media in particular does not like events that are created by governments. Sort of, they would call them artificial events. If there is a regular meeting of a group, that is different. The second is when you look at coverage in the United States, conflict sells. I mean, that's what's in the headlines. Look at everything Donald Trump does. Goes on a tweet storm, front page news. Trade war, front page news. Conflict with Congress. So I like to say, having worked at Tsinghua University for 6 years, yes, there's a front page photo in the New York Times if there's a red alert day in Beijing weather and people are wearing masks, but it's not a front page story if you say Beijing had another blue sky day today. It's the nature of news. Now, we can get specifically to this conference, but I think that's sort of the overall explanation, if not an excuse.
Yeah. Zoon, what's your take on, from a Pakistani perspective, are you surprised that there is absolutely no interest in this meeting? Is the meeting really not important?
No, I mean, I think that, of course, the meeting is very important. And the reasons for that are that we are looking at an age where China is taking an initiative to bring civilizations closer, to take us back to that part of history where we were getting along and coexisting and thriving together. So the concept is very profound. But in some sense, it does conflict with a certain mindset that we are necessarily going towards a clash of civilizations. Every country needs to democratize the concept of the nation state. We're looking at maybe on some level the nature of news coverage, which is more conflict driven and more gravitating more closely towards non-government initiatives. But also there's a question of incentives. Whose interest is it to talk about how ancient civilizations, those thoughts and those theories can bring us closer together? Maybe Asian nations. So we have to think about who is covering it and to what degree. If I specifically talk about Pakistan, then of course maybe it's not the mainstream news. It's not the news that's trending per se, but that's also because we are focused on domestic issues that are quite hot these days.
Yeah. Well, I think definitely this is not a black and white thing or right and wrong. I think the nature of news is like that. And then when it comes to a softer story, it definitely takes a little bit more to motivate the international journalists to pay attention. Now, I was just told that we have some comments, some questions from the internet. Let's check out this one from the YouTube. And this was just sent in by a person called Nelson Quado Dado, and it says, the silly, senseless and pathetic Western responses to the rise of China is a sure way for not achieving their futile objectives in a changed and changing world. This will not fly. Come again. Qinduo, what's your response?
Well, I think, you know, in a sense, he's right. I mean, for example, like for the past 40 plus years, China's economic story is a miracle, you know. But a few people in the developed countries would say, let's sit down and think about it. If there's anything China has done right, we might learn from. People, for me, I think there's a lack of being a bit modest and to see like we are not always right simply because we are from developed countries, not right. Like, you know, for the U.S., they like to impose so-called like universal values like democracy, you know, election, freedom, etc. Well, those concepts itself are good, but you have to consider the national conditions of different countries. They don't always work. Often they fail. And you know, let me return a little bit to the first topic about the media coverage here. You know, around the world, for example, this major event, few coverage in the English media.
Zero.
But you know, first of all, I don't really care that much. You know, you can still dream your dream. China is developing, is rising fast. Let's focus on our own affairs. I don't really care about the coverage or not. It's their loss. If they don't pay attention to this, it's their loss.
Yeah. May I add to it? I mean, I think it's also about giving their media or their narrative that much importance that we need to be acknowledged by it. I think on some level it's a question of Orientalism, like we are ourselves victimized in the sense that we look for legitimacy in certain objective or international media, which is Western, which is non-Asian.
Right.
So this may take us some time to understand that actually what we say, what our narrative is, or what our stories are, they're of equal importance, and we ourselves need to start giving ourselves that importance.
The confidence.
The confidence.
Well, there's a balance, right? There's a balance there at this moment, for instance, because of the dominance that the Western media has on the international stage. So if they don't talk about it, the chances are a great majority of audiences, of readers around the world will not be reading about it. So
that's right. But also see the differences between, say, mostly Western media, say Chinese media. Chinese media, many of them are called like they call it state-sponsored or state-owned media. But remember, Chinese media focuses on public interests, the national interests, the social interests, like safety, harmony between among the peoples, among different sectors. But Western media, in a sense, you can call them corporate media. They want to sell, they want to make money. Even in China nowadays, you have like private media. You know, all of those stories are sensational stories.
User-generated content?
Yeah, I think this is wrong. This is the wrong direction because you are serving profit only and nothing else.
Yeah, let's give online voices some time here. This is from one of the viewers who left us a response before the live show started by the name of Hajatullah Zia. It's from Afghanistan. It's a journalist and a freelance writer. This person says, I believe that Western media are customarily less concerned about covering positive issues, especially vis-a-vis Asian regions. Hotspots around the globe are believed to be the main focus of Western media, which have spoiled their readers. Western-centric perspective is the next reason which makes those media turn a blind eye to constructive news in Asia, including the Conference on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations. Rick, again, your response.
I think the coverage is, I mean, Afghanistan is a very good example because I would say 95% or more of the coverage that's come out of Afghanistan in this century has had to do with war or the after effects of war. And even in the years before, there were more I would say more non-war related stories coming out of the region. This is a hard one, and I will say, in the U.S., with very few exceptions, New York Times probably maybe a rare exception, there's very little international coverage. And with the exception of the Los Angeles Times reopening a bureau in Beijing, there's been less and less coverage. And I think that this is a mistake to truly understand the world. And so, yes, conflict, whether it's war or government to government, gets more attention. Yes, we should be doing more. I don't have a simple answer. Yes, the profit motive has something to do with this, but it's also the interests of people. If you took a poll of Americans, they would not be very interested in what is happening in Asia, unfortunately. And I think that that's our duty as journalists, as citizens, is to try to get people more interested in other cultures.
Sure. We again have a comment from a YouTube user by the name of Suva. And this person says, I'd ask them, I guess the Western or the international correspondents, to get out of their bubble and travel the world before judging. US, EU is not the only ones in this world. Is there a bubble, Zoon? Zoon, do you sense that let's just say the foreign correspondents living in China, whose main job is to cover China, do you think there is a bubble there?
I think that the unfortunate thing is, I'll add to your question, but also taking on from what Rick said, that it's not just negative. So first you have to come to the idea of a periphery and a center. I mean, this is an idea which can make sense, because we think about the Western and European bubble as the one creating the ideals of democracy, creating the ideals of what's appropriate, what's freedom, defining our concepts. And then we come to the periphery, which is developing countries that also look at themselves from that same lens. So the problem is right now that developing countries, the developing countries, are also covering themselves in the same way that Western media are covering them. And that's partially because of the colonial history. I mean, we take a lot of our institutions and concepts from...
We all wear Western style clothing.
We're wearing Western style. We're speaking in English. I mean, there's so many things that make us realize that it's not just the bubble that's in the West, it's the Western bubbles in every part of the world.
That's a very interesting picture.
These need to be understood.
I was speaking with a friend from Malaysia. He sent me a picture from WeChat about for local media coverage. It's an English newspaper talking about the China-U.S. trade negotiations, and you know, in that newspaper they use a language like China remained defined. You know, I'm not happy to see that. It's like China is to be tamed by the United States. Come on. We view countries are equal. We don't equal like another country is to be tamed or is to be, you know,
and the problem is that it's not just the Western, maybe that media. It's even us. We don't think we're equal. Our tragedies, our problems.
Maybe we're not confident.
No, incidents like when our own people die, it's not as tragic, or people are not changing their Facebook display pictures or not mourning in the same way as they would a tragedy in a country where you would think it's unlikely. So it's really the whole concept. The world is in a center, and we are all looking towards that center, and our immediate surroundings are less significant.
Remember in the beginning dialogue, in the opening dialogue, I talked about Southern Asia, Southwestern Asia, and Eastern Asia. But if you look at it from the West, it will be Near East, Middle East, Far East, you know.
Europe-centric.
Western-centric perspective. Now let's bring up another comment that was submitted by a student by the name of Yue. He's from Communication University of China. It says, the silence on the reporting of this conference reviews their prejudice of Asian civilizations. Celebrated scholar Michel Foucault has demonstrated that language is power. The Western media are ostensibly expressing the language, but actually delivering their ideology and constructing their world. It may seem understandable since their audience have long been accustomed to the Western-oriented world. However, it is time for a change. The language power of Asia should be strengthened. The world should not be constructed from one perspective by one principle of under one ideology. Rick, again.
Well, that's true, and it would be better for the world to have more, multipolar sources of information. Al Jazeera has been doing that, has been providing a different perspective, whether you agree with them completely or not, for several decades now. CCTV through CGTN is doing that and is expanding it, and the same way, people around the world may not agree with everything, but it gives a different perspective. I think it's a good thing. If you could have an African-based news network, that would be very valuable. South Asia, you probably would have to have two because you'd have to have India and Pakistan. but
two different perspectives.
But I think, right, I think this is good. And I think, I don't know how you start, except that you have to have either governments or wealthy people, like with Al Jazeera, willing to do it, because it is a business, and it is not something you can just do and be up and running. You have to be committed for the long run. But I think the more that happens, the more that people have a choice, the better the world will be.
I agree with Rick. If you look at the Western media coverage of Africa, for example, the key message really is about like hunger, war, disease, poverty. Everything is negative. But if you look at the CGTN Africa, their coverage, for a specific example, for the migration of the animals, like a year in Kenya, they brought it live and were being watched worldwide. And then they brought in a lot of tourists. That's a very positive image, very positive story. So local people's response is very positive too. I think that's the differences actually.
Okay, finally, I'm going to just highlight one more response from a Twitter user by the name, possibly of Doraemon Crit. This person says, I think most US people know little about Asia's cultures and history. Again, Rick.
I'll agree. I'm a student of history, and when I was in college, I tried to take history of everywhere in the world.
You were a rare one.
But that's what I was going to say. Most Americans don't travel outside the United States. Most Americans, after I went to Cambodia, would not have known about the rich history, the Angkorian culture. You could talk the same thing about India. But it's not unique to America, but it is a problem that a lot of countries are very national-centered and self-centered. And I think you have to have knowledge, but also we have to have respect for other cultures. Just because cultures are different doesn't make them better or worse.
No.
And particularly in a lot of the world, it's all viewed through the focus of religion. And so if you're not of our religion, you are inferior and you are damned for eternity.
Well, I think Asian cultures definitely do not cultivate that kind of exclusive or dichotomy, let's say. Well, I think we are going to leave it there. We are almost running out of time. I think I just want to mention one number, which is the number of overseas trips that were made by Chinese people in the year 2018. That was 150 million. So that shows the amount of curiosity, the amount of openness and appetite for learning from other countries. And I think that's a right trend. We should keep it up. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Many thanks to my guests, Professor Rick Dunham from Tsinghua University, Qinduo from China Radio International, and Zoon Ahmad Khan from Guangming Daily and Vash News Pakistan. And with that, we come to the end of the second edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. It's been a great pleasure to have you joining our conversation. I hope to see you again very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Thank you.